The war room of Nexus AI Technologies erupted in chaos as every monitor flashed crimson warnings. Victoria Ashworth stood frozen at the center of the storm, her designer heels rooted to the floor, while $500 million in artificial intelligence infrastructure collapsed around her. Board members flooded her phone with demands, investors threatening to pull funding by morning. Her elite engineering team shouted over each other, fingers flying across keyboards that mocked their desperation. In that precise moment of maximum catastrophe, the door swung open to reveal Evan Parker pushing his janitorial cart, his 6-year-old daughter's face glowing on the phone propped against his cleaning supplies. Victoria's composure shattered. She spun toward the intruder with volcanic fury, every ounce of terror transmuting into rage. "You understand any of this?" She spat, gesturing at the cascading failure. "This is for people with actual brains." The room erupted in nervous laughter, but when Victoria demanded Evan identify the error, expecting stammering apologies, he quietly described the exact flaw in the core logic architecture. Silence crashed through the room. Victoria Ashworth stood paralyzed, her world tilting on its axis. 12 hours earlier, Evan Parker woke in darkness to the familiar symphony of a cramped apartment, fighting against the Minnesota winter. The radiator clanked its morning protest, while frost crawled across the single window overlooking the parking lot of Riverside Apartments in St. Paul. He moved through shadows with practiced quiet, careful not to wake Lily before her alarm. The kitchen occupied one corner of the main room, separated from the sleeping area by a bookshelf he had built from salvaged wood. Every surface gleamed despite aged appliances and cracked linoleum. Evan had learned that dignity lived in details, in how a man kept his space when the world assumed he had surrendered. He started the coffee maker, a thrift store find requiring a specific sequence of button presses, then pulled eggs and bread from a refrigerator decorated with Lily's artwork. Stick figures holding hands dominated most drawings, always a tall one and a small one beneath yellow suns or inside houses with triangular roofs. No mother figure appeared in any of them. Lily had been 3 when Sarah died, too young for memories but old enough to sense the absence. Evan cracked eggs into a pan, his mind cataloging the day ahead. Morning shift at Nexus AI Technologies, then a 4-hour gap before his evening delivery route. In between, he would pick Lily up from after-school care and help with homework at the public library. The stack of bills on the kitchen table caught the first gray light of dawn. Medical debt from Sarah's final months, when insurance covered less while the hospital demanded more. Student loans from his abandoned doctoral program, deferred but never forgiven. Evan had done the math countless times, knew exactly how many years of double shifts lay between him and solvency. He never complained because complaint required energy better spent elsewhere, and because Lily needed a father who moved forward. She appeared in the doorway as he plated the eggs, blonde hair tangled from sleep, clutching the stuffed elephant that had belonged to her mother. At 6 years old, Lily possessed her father's quiet intensity and her mother's stubborn optimism. She climbed onto her chair and studied the eggs with exaggerated seriousness before declaring them acceptable. Evan poured himself coffee, savoring these minutes before the world demanded its pound of flesh. "Can I come to work with you today?" Lily asked, as she asked every morning. School made this impossible, but she persisted. Evan reminded her about Mrs. Henderson's class and her reading assignment. Lily sighed theatrically, then brightened. "But you'll call me when you're cleaning? So I can see the big computers?" This had become their ritual. A FaceTime connection during his lunch break. He would show her the gleaming corridors of Nexus AI, and she would pretend her father worked in a spaceship. Before leaving, Lily insisted on helping prepare his janitorial cart. She had decorated it herself over the past year, adding stickers of stars and rockets and cartoon animals. "So everyone knows you're special," she had explained. Now she selected a new sticker, a golden sun with a smiling face, and pressed it onto the cart's handle. Evan knelt to accept her hug, breathing in strawberry shampoo, storing this moment against the hours ahead. What no one at Nexus AI suspected was that Evan Parker had once stood on the other side of the divide. 7 years ago, he had been a third-year doctoral candidate in machine learning at UC Berkeley, his dissertation research earning attention from labs across Silicon Valley. His papers on recursive learning architectures had been cited in major journals. Sarah had been finishing her own degree in educational psychology, and they had built a life of books and dreams. Then the pregnancy, then the diagnosis 3 months later, then the brutal algorithm of aggressive cancer meeting failing treatments. Evan took leave that became permanent, his career dissolving into caring for his wife and infant daughter. After Sarah's death, he had no savings, no support, and a child who needed him present. The janitor job had been temporary. 3 years later, he was still pushing the same cart, still invisible. The emergency began at 2:43 in the afternoon. Evan was cleaning the executive floor when alarms started screaming. A digital shriek accompanied by flashing screens in every office. He watched through glass walls as engineers sprinted toward the main war room, their faces tight with panic. Curiosity pulled him along, pushing his cart into a corner near the entrance, where he could observe without obstructing. The scene inside resembled a disaster film, dozens of people shouting while monitors displayed cascading error messages in aggressive red. Victoria Ashworth commanded the center, her voice cutting through noise with practiced authority. Evan recognized her from company newsletters, the youngest CEO in Nexus AI's history. A tech prodigy who had built the company's flagship product from her Stanford dorm room. In person, she seemed smaller but far more intense, a compressed star burning with frantic energy. She demanded explanations no one could provide, threatening consequences everyone feared. The $500 million Prometheus project, 3 years of development, was collapsing in real time. Evan watched the engineers argue, his trained mind automatically parsing their technical shorthand. They were looking in the wrong places, chasing symptoms rather than causes. The error pattern pointed clearly to a recursive loop failure, something he had written about extensively during his Berkeley years. He could see the solution taking shape, elegant and obvious, but said nothing. His job was emptying trash cans. His job was invisibility. His job was protecting the fragile stability he had built for Lily. Then Lily's face appeared on his phone. Her scheduled FaceTime call. She wanted to see the spaceship computers, and Evan angled his phone to show her the blinking lights. But Lily noticed the distress around him. "Why are they sad, Daddy?" Evan tried to explain that the computers were sick, and people were trying to help. "Can't you help them?" Lily asked. "You know about computers. You told me you used to teach them things." The engineers nearby overheard, their attention snagging on the absurdity of a janitor's daughter suggesting he could solve their problem. Laughter rippled through the room, cruel and exhausted. Victoria seized on this moment, turning her frustration toward an easy target. She crossed to where Evan stood with his cart, her designer suit immaculate, her eyes holding the particular contempt that power reserves for powerlessness. "Your daughter thinks you can help?" Victoria's voice carried through the suddenly quiet room. "By all means, enlighten us. What do you see when you look at this screen?" She gestured toward the central monitor, expecting stammering embarrassment. Evan looked at the screen. The recursive loop failure screamed at him from error logs, clear as a misspelled word. He could remain silent, accept mockery, preserve invisibility. But Lily was watching, waiting to see what her father would do. "The cascade originates in your memory allocation subroutine," he said quietly. "You've created a circular dependency in the neural pathway initialization. The system is calling a function that references itself before completion, creating infinite regress that overwhelms buffer capacity. You need to restructure the initialization sequence to establish base parameters before recursive calls begin." The silence that followed contained a different quality than mockery. Evan watched understanding dawn on faces around the room, engineers recognizing truth in what he described, recognizing also the impossibility of a janitor possessing such knowledge. Victoria stood frozen, her planned humiliation reflected back as confusion and the first stirrings of shame. Lily's voice broke through the phone speaker, bright with pride. "See, Daddy? I told them you could help." Victoria Ashworth did not become CEO by accepting embarrassment gracefully. The shock of Evan's diagnosis transformed into defensive fury, a need to reassert dominance. She stepped closer to him, close enough to smell expensive perfume cutting through recycled air. "Anyone can parrot technical terminology they overheard," she said loudly. "Actually fixing complex systems requires expertise that takes decades to develop." Her eyes swept the room, gathering allies among senior engineers who resented a janitor showing them up. "If you're so confident, why don't you prove it? Fix the system yourself." The challenge hung like a thrown gauntlet. Evan recognized the trap, either refuse and confirm his place as pretender, or try and fail more dramatically. Victoria was betting $500 million that a janitor couldn't back up his words. Several engineers shifted uncomfortably. One young woman with tired eyes started to object. "Miss Ashworth, maybe we should focus on the problem." Victoria silenced her with a look that could freeze Minnesota winter solid. "I'm waiting," Victoria said. "Unless your expertise ends at description." She pulled $1,000 from her wallet, crisp hundreds fanned like a poker hand. "I'll bet this against your next month's salary that you can't do anything useful." Evan looked at the money, then the screen, then his phone where Lily watched with wide eyes. His daughter believed he could do anything. He had worked hard to earn that faith, staying up late for homework, building her bookshelf when they couldn't afford one. But this was stepping out of shadows. exposing himself to scrutiny that could cost Lily the stability she needed. "Daddy." Lily's voice came through small but certain. "Remember what you told me about being brave? That brave isn't not being scared. Brave is doing the right thing even when you're scared?" The words were his own, offered during a thunderstorm when she had crawled into his bed trembling. Hearing them reflected back. Something shifted in his chest. He handed his phone to the young engineer who had tried to defend him. "Could you hold this?" "So she can see." The engineer took it carefully. Angling toward the central workstation, Evan approached the keyboard where Victoria stood. And for a moment they were close enough to touch CEO and Janitor, power and poverty, pride and quiet determination. "I'll need access to the core architecture," Evan said, his voice carrying no challenge, only calm professionalism. Victoria hesitated, then gestured sharply at a senior engineer to provide credentials. The login screen gave way to dense walls of code, millions of lines representing years of development. Evan's fingers found the keyboard with muscle memory, the particular rhythm of coding that had once been natural as breathing. He navigated through directory structures with swift efficiency. Past interface code to the neural network's core initialization routines, engineers leaned forward, watching a janitor move through their life's work with unsettling confidence. Victoria maintained position beside him, arms crossed, face set in determined skepticism. The flaw revealed itself exactly where Evan predicted, buried in a recursive function referencing variables not yet instantiated. He could see how it happened, an optimization attempt creating elegant circular dependency, the kind of error that looked correct until traced through multiple iterations. 3 lines needed to change, 3 lines out of millions. He made modifications with precise keystrokes, restructuring initialization to establish base parameters before any recursive calls began. "Enter when ready," Victoria said, her voice betraying first cracks of uncertainty. Evan verified his changes, then pressed the key. Monitors flickered. Error messages began disappearing, replaced by cool blue of successful processes. Status indicators shifted from red to amber to green in a cascade sweeping across the war room, like dawn breaking over mountains. Somewhere in the building's depths, servers that had been screaming in digital agony settled into harmonious operation. The war room erupted. Engineers shouted and embraced, releasing hours of tension in one explosive moment. The young woman holding Evan's phone jumped up and down, exhaustion forgotten. On screen, Lily clapped her hands with delighted pride, but Evan barely noticed celebration. His attention remained fixed on Victoria, watching her face cycle through shock, disbelief, and something darker, the first recognition of what she had done. She stared at green status lights, as if personally betrayed. The $1,000 remained clutched in her hand, forgotten props from drama that hadn't followed expected script. Around her, people praised the janitor who had saved their project, their jobs, their company's future. Victoria Ashworth, who had built Nexus AI through sheer brilliance, had just been publicly outperformed by a man who emptied her trash cans. "Run full diagnostics," she ordered, voice carefully controlled. "I want verification from every department that systems are stable." The command reasserted authority, reminded everyone who held power regardless of who had performed a miracle. Engineers scattered to stations, but eyes kept returning to Evan, who had stepped back and now stood quietly beside his decorated cart. The diagnostics took 20 minutes, during which Evan waited in patient silence, while Victoria paced and engineers whispered. When results appeared, the room fell quiet again. Not only had Evan's fix resolved the cascading failure, but his restructured initialization had improved overall system efficiency by 15%. Processes requiring 12 seconds now completed in 10. Memory usage dropped by nearly 20%. The janitor had not merely saved their project, he had made it significantly better. Victoria read the numbers 3 times, certain there must be error. But data held firm under every analysis. A janitor had walked into her war room and casually outperformed her entire engineering department. A man she had publicly humiliated possessed skills that apparently exceeded her own. The senior engineer who had provided credentials approached Evan with undisguised awe. Where did you learn to?" He couldn't complete the question, couldn't bridge the gap between janitor and virtuoso. Evan offered a slight shrug. "Lucky guess. Sometimes fresh eyes help." But modest words convinced no one. Engineers had spent years developing Prometheus, lived inside its code, and none had seen what Evan saw in moments. Victoria watched the exchange. Expression unreadable. The $1,000 had disappeared back into her wallet. Bet unfulfilled by mutual unspoken consent. When Evan retrieved his phone, told Lily he would call after work, Victoria made no move to stop him. She simply watched as the janitor collected his cart and wheeled it toward the door, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Victoria remained in her office long after most staff went home, staring at personnel files on her laptop. Evan Parker, employee number 7,442, hired 3 years ago for janitorial services. No listed education beyond high school. The file contained nothing explaining what she had witnessed. She began searching beyond company records, driven by need to understand that felt almost physical. The first hint came from an old Berkeley alumni newsletter, a brief mention of promising doctoral candidates in machine learning. Evan Parker had published 4 papers in peer-reviewed journals before completing his 3rd year, an exceptional rate attracting attention from major tech firms. Victoria found breadcrumbs scattered across academic databases. Conference presentations, citation records, a dissertation proposal reviewers called groundbreaking, then nothing. Abrupt end to stellar career. Coinciding with dates that deeper search connected to an obituary for Sarah Parker, beloved wife and mother, taken too soon. Victoria sat in darkness as the full picture assembled itself. The janitor cleaning her floors had once been a rising star in her field. The man she had publicly humiliated possessed expertise matching or exceeding her own. He had abandoned everything: education, career, future to care for dying wife and motherless daughter. He had fallen from academic heights to service work invisibility without complaint, bitterness, or desire for recognition. She thought about Lily's face on the phone, absolute confidence declaring her father capable of anything. She thought about Evan's quiet dignity facing mockery. His refusal to defend himself, even holding knowledge to devastate attackers. What kind of man possessed such brilliance and chose to hide it? Could suffer such loss and emerge with kindness intact? Something shifted in Victoria's chest. Unfamiliar sensation she eventually identified as shame. She had built her career on certainty of superiority, assuming success proved worth, and failure proved its absence. Evan Parker challenged every premise justifying her treatment of people she considered beneath her. He was brilliant and humble, devastated and functional, invisible by choice, not limitation. Everything she believed about achievement and value began cracking under weight of his example. The following morning, Victoria found herself watching for Evan's arrival through her office window. She observed him park his aging sedan, retrieve his decorated cart, move through security with a wave to the guard, who knew his name. She watched him begin rounds on first floor, methodical and thorough, treating every task with disproportionate respect. When he FaceTimed Lily during lunch, showing her gleaming corridors as promised, Victoria had to turn away from the window to manage pressure building behind her eyes. 2 days after the war room incident, Victoria did something unprecedented. She left the executive floor and descended to maintenance level, past loading docks and storage rooms, to the small break area where janitorial staff gathered. Evan sat alone at a scarred table, eating a homemade sandwich, reading a paperback with cracked spine. He looked up when she entered, expression neutral but watchful, prepared for whatever new humiliation this visit might bring. "May I sit?" Victoria asked, voice sounding strange against concrete walls and fluorescent lights. Evan gestured to the chair across from him, and she lowered herself carefully, smoothing her skirt against cheap plastic. They sat in silence, 2 people from opposite ends of invisible spectrum, neither certain how to bridge the gap. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said finally. "What I did in the war room was inexcusable. I was frightened and overwhelmed. But that doesn't justify how I treated you." The words felt inadequate, but Evan's face softened slightly, wariness giving way to something more open. "I understand pressure," he said. "I understand making mistakes when everything feels like it's falling apart." His voice held no accusation. He was offering grace without conditions. Victoria found herself telling him about board members calling for resignation, investors threatening to pull funding, 3 years poured into Prometheus. She spoke about isolation of leadership, impossibility of showing weakness. Evan listened with quiet attention, asking questions that drew out truths she had never spoken aloud. By conversation's end, she had shared more with this janitor than with anyone in years. "Your daughter," Victoria said as time wound down. "She clearly believes in you completely." Evan's face transformed at Lily's mention, guarded professional disappearing into pure paternal warmth. "She's the reason I get up every morning. Everything else is just details." Victoria nodded slowly, recognizing a priority system she had never considered, where success meant something entirely different than market share. A new crisis emerged 3 days later, potential security vulnerability, exposing client data. The engineering team mobilized, but initial assessments proved inconclusive. Victoria found herself thinking of Evan. of clarity he brought to previous catastrophe. Before second-guessing, she sent a message asking if he could join diagnostics. Evan arrived at the war room in janitorial uniform, pushing his cart with constellation of lily stickers. Engineers' reactions ranged from surprise to resentment, but Victoria's authority silenced objections, and soon Evan stood before monitors, studying the new threat with familiar intensity. The collaboration surprised everyone. Evan possessed not only diagnostic brilliance, but ability to explain complex concepts in accessible terms. Victoria watched him work with engineers, drawing out their best thinking while contributing consistently valuable insights. The dynamic shifted from CEO and employee to something closer to partnership. Over following weeks, collaborative sessions became regular. Victoria summoned Evan for technical consultations, and he arrived with cart and quiet competence, contributing without ego, then returning to cleaning as if nothing unusual occurred. The arrangement made no formal sense Janitor as technical advisor, but worked with effectiveness defying organizational charts. Conversations expanded beyond technical matters. Evan spoke about Sarah with tenderness that made Victoria's chest ache, about building a life together, about devastating speed of losing her. He spoke about Lily, about terror of single parenthood, about daily miracle of watching her grow. Victoria shared her own loneliness, romantic relationships sacrificed to ambition, family connections withered by neglect. They were both isolated differently, both carrying invisible burdens. Attraction crept up on Victoria without warning, heightened awareness of Evan's presence, preoccupation with his opinions, simple admission that she looked forward to seeing him in ways she had never experienced. She resisted, tried burying it beneath professionalism. CEO developing feelings for Janitor would fuel damaging gossip. But emotions proved resistant to corporate logic. Evan's feelings developed along parallel tracks, though more carefully hidden. He had loved Sarah completely, assumed that chapter closed permanently. But Victoria surprised him with vulnerability beneath polished exterior, genuine desire to grow past limitations. He saw her learning to treat people with kindness, implementing policies valuing workers beyond productivity. She was becoming someone different under his influence, and he found transformation beautiful. The breaking point came during a quarterly board meeting Victoria had dreaded for weeks. Several members, led by venture capitalist Harrison Blake, had been agitating to remove her as CEO, citing Prometheus crisis as evidence of failed leadership. They did not know a janitor had solved the crisis. To them, Victoria had simply managed resolution through unquestioned means, but Harrison Blake had hired external consultants to analyze the Prometheus fix. What he discovered became a weapon. During the board meeting, broadcast on video conference worldwide, Blake revealed the solution had come from janitorial staff. The implication was clear: if janitors saved flagship products, what did that say about leadership? The board's reaction was immediate. Directors who supported Victoria began wavering. Questions multiplied about judgment, hiring practices, ability to maintain a company where such situations occurred. Blake proposed a no-confidence motion, suggesting replacement by more qualified leadership. In that moment, with career crumbling, Victoria faced choice. She could deflect blame onto Evan, characterize his involvement as aberration, throw him to wolves to save herself. Or she could tell truth. Evan watched the board meeting from maintenance office monitor, alerted by a sympathetic engineer. He saw Victoria's face as accusations mounted, calculations behind her eyes. He knew what pragmatic choice looked like, knew protecting him would likely cost everything she built. Part of him wished he had remained invisible. Let engineers take credit. Never stepped forward. When Victoria's voice came through speakers, Evan braced for inevitable. But words that followed shattered every expectation. Victoria described Evan's qualifications, his Berkeley research, his published papers, the expertise he brought to crisis. She explained she had been cultivating his talents, recognizing extraordinary ability wherever it appeared. Then she said something making Evan's breath catch. Evan Parker represents exactly the thinking this company needs. Intelligence does not care about job titles. Brilliance appears where it appears. My job as CEO is recognizing it and creating conditions where it flourishes. If you remove me for doing exactly that, you will make a profound mistake. The meeting ended without resolution, motion tabled for discussion. But damage was done. Evan had been exposed, privacy stripped away, invisible life thrust into corporate spotlight. He sat in maintenance office long after monitor went dark, processing implications. She had chosen his reputation over her survival. She had defended him when silence would have been safer. She had, in a room full of powerful people, declared him worthy. Lily noticed something had changed when Evan picked her up from school. His face held expressions she couldn't name: worry, wonder, something almost like hope. She asked if he was okay, using the serious tone learned from their conversations about feelings. Evan knelt to her level and told her something complicated had happened at work. That people knew now about his special computer skills. That things might be different. Different good or different bad? Lily asked. Evan considered with honesty he always tried giving her. I don't know yet. But whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. Lily nodded solemnly, accepting this answer with trust she had always placed in him. Then she hugged him tight. I'm glad they know you're smart, Daddy. Now they can see what I see. The fallout continued over following days. The story leaked beyond Nexus AI, picked up by tech journalists hungry for unusual narratives. Media requests flooded communications. Evan found himself photographed in parking lots, quoted in articles he never agreed to. Invisibility cultivated for years evaporated in heat of public attention. Victoria called him to her office on a rainy Thursday evening. She looked exhausted, strain evident in shadows under her eyes. But when she saw him, something in her face relaxed. As if his presence provided comfort nothing else could match. They sat together watching rain-streaked floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights blurring into impressionist patterns. I'm sorry, Victoria said. I never intended for your privacy to be compromised like this. Evan shook his head slowly. You were protecting yourself. And me. I understand why you did what you did. But Victoria leaned forward, eyes intense with something like desperation. I wasn't just protecting you professionally, Evan. These past weeks, working with you, talking with you, I felt things I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Evan thought about Sarah, about years of solitary grief, about walls built to protect himself and Lily from further loss. He thought about Victoria's transformation, genuine kindness emerging from beneath corporate armor. He thought about what Lily would want, her endless questions about whether Daddy would ever find someone to love him. I have feelings too, he said quietly. Feelings I wasn't looking for. But I have to think about Lily first. Anything between us has to include her. Has to be good for her. Victoria nodded immediately, face showing no disappointment. I would never expect anything else. Lily is part of who you are. I want to know her, to be good to her, to earn whatever place she might allow me. They talked until rain stopped and sky lightened, sharing fears and hopes and tentative outline of future neither had imagined. When Evan stood to leave, Victoria caught his hand, first physical contact beyond professional handshakes. The touch sent electricity through both of them, a promise of connection transcending impossible circumstances. The introduction of Victoria to Lily happened on a Sunday afternoon in the park near Evan's apartment. Victoria arrived, dressed more casually than Evan had ever seen, jeans and simple blouse, looking nervous in ways making him want to protect her. Lily studied the visitor with intense scrutiny, noting how this woman looked at her father, the careful respect in her posture, the genuine smile reaching her eyes. Are you Daddy's friend? Lily asked directly. Victoria knelt to the little girl's level, designer jeans pressing into playground mulch without apparent concern. I hope I can be. Your daddy has told me so much about you. He says you're the bravest person he knows. Lily considered this, glanced at Evan for confirmation. He nodded slightly, and something in her expression shifted from wariness to cautious welcome. They spent the afternoon together, pushing Lily on swings, sharing ice cream, watching Lily demonstrate monkey bar skills with proud intensity. Victoria proved unexpectedly adept at engaging a 6-year-old, asking interesting questions, listening with genuine attention. By sunset, Lily had declared Victoria acceptable significant approval. The board reconvened 2 weeks later to vote on Blake's no-confidence motion. In intervening time, several things changed calculations significantly. Media coverage generated overwhelming positive attention, framing Nexus AI as organization, recognizing talent regardless of background. Applications tripled, client inquiries doubled. Prometheus exceeded every benchmark. Victoria had quietly negotiated with keyboard members, securing support. When the vote came, the motion failed decisively. Harrison Blake resigned the following day. His power play having backfired, Victoria emerged stronger than before. Position secure and reputation enhanced. She immediately announced new initiative, a program identifying and developing hidden talent within support staff. Evan would lead it. The wedding took place 1 year later. In the garden of a historic inn outside St. Paul. Autumn leaves, providing a canopy of gold and crimson. The guest list remained small by design people who actually mattered. Engineers mixed with neighbors from Evan's apartment complex. Worlds of wealth and working class finding common ground. Lily served as flower girl, her dress a confection of white tulle she had helped Victoria select during a shopping trip, cementing their bond. She walked the aisle with exaggerated solemnity, scattering petals with precision of a 6-year-old performing sacred duty. When she reached front, she took place between the two adults who would now be her parents, face glowing with happiness needing no translation. Victoria's vows spoke of transformation, of the janitor teaching her that brilliance came in unexpected packages and kindness mattered more than power. She promised spending her life learning from him, growing with him, building family valuing character over credentials. Her voice broke several times, but she pushed through, determined to say everything she felt. Evan's vows were simpler, quieter. He spoke of Sarah, of love they shared, and the daughter she gave him. He spoke of years walking alone, certain his heart had closed permanently, and he spoke of Victoria, the fierce, frightened, formidable woman who challenged his assumptions about second chances. You gave me a home when I thought I would never have one again. You became family when I thought our family was complete. Everything I am belongs to you and Lily now. Lily held up a sign she had made herself. Letters wobbling but legible. Finally, I have a family. Guests laughed through tears, mixture of humor and heartbreak marking truest moments of human experience. Evan lifted his daughter into his arms, and Victoria stepped into the embrace, 3 people becoming one unit in autumn light. As party wound down and guests departed, Evan and Victoria found themselves alone on the inn's terrace, stars emerging above darkened garden. Lily had fallen asleep inside, exhausted by excitement. Flower girl dress, rumpled, and perfect. They stood together in quiet, hand in hand, watching breath form clouds in cooling air. I never expected any of this, Victoria said softly. A year ago, I was certain I knew what my life would look like, alone at the top, successful by every metric that mattered. I had no idea how wrong I was about what mattered. Evan squeezed her hand. He had carried his own certainties, his own limitations, his own conviction that certain doors had closed permanently. Lily asked me something yesterday, he said. She wanted to know if she could call you Mom. I told her she needed to ask you herself, but I wanted you to be ready for the question. Victoria's face crumpled and rebuilt itself in span of a breath. I would be honored, she whispered. I would be so honored. Inside, Lily stirred, some instinct rousing her at the moment her future was being decided. She stumbled onto the terrace in wrinkled dress, rubbing eyes against darkness, then spotted her father and new stepmother silhouetted against stars. She crossed to them with unsteady determination, and they parted to make room between them. I love you, Daddy, Lily murmured into Evan's chest. I love you, Mommy, she added, testing the word for first time, finding it natural on her tongue. Victoria made a sound neither laugh nor sob, but somehow both, arms tightening around the little girl who had just given her life's greatest gift. They stood together in darkness, the janitor and CEO and the child who believed in them, both watching stars wheel overhead in eternal patterns. Behind them, inn windows glowed with remnants of celebration. Ahead, a future stretched that none could have predicted but all had chosen. In language of family, redemption, and love transcending every artificial boundary, they had found their way home.